All right, I think we're in business this time. Okay, so make sure you open your notes up to that go with this. If you go to Google Classroom, you're going to find a doc on there called Heredity and Traits Notes. It should make you make a copy of that. And then obviously you're not going to use a pencil to write on your screen to take notes. So you're going to be typing those in. But please make sure you do that. That all this information we're going to talk about will help you on our next Friday quiz, which is on Friday. I know that's crazy. So the topic here is heredity and pea plants. You'll see how those two kind of fit together in a second. But we're going to start off with heredity because that's a strange word. I don't recognize it. We haven't talked about it yet. So let's kind of get into it. And again, you got to have your notes to go with this. So make sure you have that open. If you need to pause for a second and get that taken care of so that way you can follow with us. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a trait. This should be pretty easy. I'm going to give you a second to jot some of those things down in your notes. It's the very top thing there. It says, what is a trait? List some examples. So go ahead and do that. And then if you need to, again, pause it. I'll still be here. That's how this works, I think. Okay, so traits. Hopefully you came up with a couple of good examples. Obviously, hair color's an easy one. Eye color, how tall you are, how short you are, anything like that. Those are all physical traits. So we need to understand what those are going forward because everything we talk about now is related to traits. Next up is the word heredity. So I'm not going to tell you right away what heredity is. I want you to see if you can recognize any words that sound like heredity. And again, in your notes, you'll find a space for that. So, oh, never mind. I ruined it. There is no space for that. You'll just have to think about it. Hopefully you're doing some thinking right now. All right, so heredity is the passing of genetic materials from parents to offspring. Again, heredity is the passing of genetic material from parents to offspring. We've got a couple puppies here. Remember, we talked about a wolf pup and its mother, and we said, what do they have in common? And obviously, they're both wolves. Hooray. They both have fur. I believe they both have the same color fur as well. So those are important details when we're talking about heredity. You are passing genetic info from parent to offspring. So obviously, you're going to get similar genetic info from your parents, but it's not going to be exact. Remember, mitosis deals in exact copies being passed on, but when humans reproduce, it's not through mitosis, it's meiosis. So things are going to combine and be different. So I want you see in the notes there, it says, think of the word inherit. I know that doesn't necessarily sound like heredity. It sort of does, but heredity is all about inheriting something from your parents. It's not going to be exact though. Okay. Let's go to the next slide here. And we're going to meet a nice scientist named Gregor Mendel. So Mendel is kind of like our Alfred Wegener for this topic. He's considered to be the father of modern genetics. You remember Alfred Wegener was the father of modern geology. So both really important guys. Sorry, my puppy's eating a bone down here, making a whole bunch of noise. Hopefully it's not bothering you. So Mendel was around in the 1800s. He would live from 1822 to 1884. He was about 64 when he died. And he, like I said, he's the father of modern genetics. So all of his work kind of took off and led us to a point where we are today, where we can actually look at your DNA and figure out exactly what is making you look the way you do, which is where we're going from here. So Mendel, being like any old scientist, he was into pea plants. So he thought it would be a good idea to take pea plants and cross them together. Now, when you see the word crossed, this is going to pop up a bunch of times. Can I highlight? I can, because I'm so talented like that. So when you see the word cross, that means you're breeding together. So when it says he crossed a yellow pea plant with a green pea plant, that's a tough sentence to say. He's taking them and he's breeding them together to see what their offspring will be. Now, in years past, I've had a lot of students go, wait a second, plants don't reproduce the same way humans do. And that's a common misconception. I understand why you would think that, because plants are stuck in the ground. You don't see them meet up and exchange through meiosis. So that would make sense to have that misconception. But many plants do reproduce sexually. So inside of a plant, there are structures that make sperm cells. There are structures that make egg cells. But Mr. Durfler, how do they combine? Why do you think we care about bees so much? So think about pollinators. They're passing on, or I guess they're really delivering those cells for the plants because the plants can't walk and meet each other. Pea plants, they fall under the category of sexual reproduction. He crosses yellow pea plants with green pea plants, and the result is what we call the first generation. So you're going to hear this pop up a lot of times. We're talking about generations, and it's exactly what you think it is. Okay, so if Gregor Mendel took pea plants, bred them together, he crossed them, the offspring from those initial parents are going to be the first generation. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. So he got a whole bunch of green pea plants. He took green and yellow, bred them together. All he got was green. So he was like, oh, that's kind of weird because I put a yellow pea plant. What's going on there? So then he took all the green pea plants. I got to stop saying pea plants. It's really tough on my brain here. So he took all of the green pea plants from the first generation. He bred those together. Okay. And the result of that was the second generation. Now, some yellow plants showed up in the second generation. So let's kind of go through a little bit of a drawing. Can I do some drawings? Yeah. So first generation, and forgive my mouse kind of drawing here. So first generation is one yellow and one green. Okay. Now he bred those together and he got all green. And that was the second generation. Sorry, I got to really focus on my pen. You guys know how bad I am on an actual whiteboard. This is 10 times harder. Okay, so the second generation is all green. Now, he got two, let's say he got two greens. Obviously, I'm kind of making that up a little bit. He probably got a bunch. But he took those two greens and he decided to breed them together. And the result is oh, I messed this up. I'm sorry. This isn't the first generation. This is the first generation. There we go. This is just the parents. So forget that right there. Okay, so first generation is all green, which came from the parents, which were yellow and green. Okay, now it's a little bit weird to get all green when you had some yellow and some green, but Mendel wasn't too sad about that. He just kept breeding. So he took the two greens and then he made a second generation in which he got some green and some yellow. So you see the yellow went away. Let me change my color here if I can do that. We'll go blue. The yellow went away here in that first generation, but then it shows up again in the second generation, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's a lot of wondering that came from that. Mendel was like, what's going on here? That doesn't make sense to me. So let's continue on. If I can, there we go. Okay, so the question that I want you to answer in your notes is, how is it possible that all green plants generated some yellow plants? Okay, so think about that first generation, all green, and then he bred the first generation together. He got some green, some yellow. How's that possible? I want you to take a minute, answer in the notes what you're thinking, and then we'll kind of continue from here. Now, the next question after you've answered that is, in your notes, if we get our DNA from our parents, why don't we look exactly like them? So we talked about this a little bit. Hopefully you remember a little bit. Why don't we look exactly like our parents? It's not possible. We'll never look exactly like one of our parents. Why? So go ahead and answer that in your notes as well. So before we continue, I want to answer kind of both of those questions. So the first one being, how can all green plants breed to sometimes make a yellow plant? The answer to that is not all of your traits are made equally. In other words, there's some traits that can kind of block out other traits, and we call them, you'll see here, dominant versus recessive traits. And so that's the explanation, is that even though you had all green plants in that first generation, even though they were all green, they still had a trait for yellow pea plants, kind of hiding underneath in the DNA. So you had the green was kind of the overshadowing trait. That's the one that we saw, but underneath there was still a yellow trait that wasn't. So when you combine pea plants that have both traits, sometimes you can get a yellow, sometimes you'll get a green, and we'll get more into that in a little bit here. So how is that possible? You'll see. Now, if we get our DNA from our parents, why don't we look exactly like them is the next question. So if you remember, hopefully you watched the mitosis meiosis review. When you are first made, you start off as one cell, okay? Where do you get your DNA from? You get half from mom, you get half from dad, okay? When those two halves come together, obviously they make one whole, but they also can combine in a number of different ways, okay? So even though my dad has, even though my mom has brown eyes, I don't get brown eyes from my mom. It's not a guarantee. My dad has blue eyes. I don't even have blue eyes. So I have a combination of the two. Now, that'll be the case. Is it always going to be a blend? No. Sometimes you'll get a lot more traits and look more like mom. Sometimes you'll get a lot more traits and look more like dad. It's basically a roll of the dice. You roll the dice, the genes come out however they do. So we'll never look like our mom and dad exactly because we are half DNA from mom, half DNA from dad, and when they combine, the way they mix can be completely random, and that's why in most cases you don't look exactly like either. I know Casey's out there still wondering why do twins exist. We'll get there, Casey, I promise. But hopefully that answers those two questions. Let me quickly recap your notes here. So you should have explained what you think a trait is. Remember, heredity is the passing of genetic information from parents to offspring. Think of the word inherit. Mendel decided to breed yellow pea plants with green. The result was the first generation, and they were all green plants. And then, however, when the all green plants were bred together, the yellow plant showed back up in the second generation. And that's going to take us to the textbook. So we're going to stop there for now. Let me flip over to the textbook. And then again, if you need to access the textbook, if you don't have your copy with you, it should be available on Classroom. So look for that link and we'll kind of get into it from there. Okay, see you guys in a second.